Benvenute e benvenuti in questo nuovo appuntamento di FPA con le interviste alle aziende che supportano la trasformazione digitale del nostro paese. Oggi parliamo di innovazione, competitività, indipendenza tecnologica e creazione di posti di lavoro, ovvero tutte dimensioni che impattano le politiche nazionali volte a diffondere la cultura open source. La DG Connect della Commissione Europea ci dice che se aumentassimo del circa 10% gli investimenti in software open source potremmo contribuire alla nascita di oltre 600 nuove start-up nell'Unione Europea, generando un PIL di quasi 100 miliardi di euro. Eppure ancora c'è molta strada da fare per sfruttare pienamente il potenziale dell'open source e anche le PA italiane sono lontane dal target che ci si era prefissati. Questo conferma che la cultura dell'open source deve essere a tutti i costi alimentata. Di questo ne parliamo oggi con un ospite d'eccezione internazionale, Gerald Pfeifer, CTO di SUSE. I'm very happy here to host on our channels for this short interview on the concept of open source, Mr. Gerald Pfeifer, Chief Technology Officer at SUSE. Hi, Gerald, nice to meet you.
Buongiorno.
The first question that I would like to ask you is, I said about open source. The all internet infrastructure is built and depends on open source. So the general use of open source solutions are every day. So when we surf on the web with Android phones, when we watch film on streaming platforms, or we communicate with instant messaging. But what does it mean, open source, in your perspective?
Yeah, formally, open source is defined via open source licenses. That's attached to source codes and gives freedoms. It gives the user the freedom to actually inspect the software they're using. So have a look at the source code, use the source code to run the software, and modify the software. So you can make changes, you can make improvements. And then that's the fourth freedom. You can take that and share it with others. That's the legal perspective, if you want. I mean, real open source or strong open source is much more, in my opinion. It's about collaboration and it's about community. And it's not just sharing the code. You know, you can take the code, package it, put it on a website, put an open source license on it. That's not my understanding of open source. Real open source and successful open source is about sharing ideas and feedback and use cases and sometimes bugs and documentation. And it's about interacting. And in successful projects, it's really about the interactions irrespective of age and gender and, you know, the color of your passport and the color of your skin and the color of your t-shirt. So technically, open source is about open source licenses. But it's much more than that. And it's about, obviously, technology, but it transcends technology. It's about us humans, how we connect, how we collaborate, how we innovate together.
Okay, thank you. This kind of vision suggests me the fact that open sources can be seen as an approach, completely an approach, as I can say also a philosophy. The review Forbes writes that open source is also the closest concept that we have to a meritocracy. What do you think? It's true, and why?
I've worked in academic environments and science for years. And indeed, open source reminds me quite a lot of that and how we, work in science, where in both cases, it's the competition of ideas. It's not about competition of marketing budgets and who has more political power or whatever. It's really small ideas can turn into something really big. If you think Linux, we all know Linux, probably. The Linux kernel, a student started that at university, and in the words he used was, it's just a little thing that I'm doing here. And now, as you mentioned, Linux powers the internet and cell phones and everything. So it's from small, it can grow big. One aspect of open source and meritocracy is the ability to influence. As a user, as a contributor, we all have, given the transparency, and it's a third aspect, we can influence open source. And specific to software and open source there is security. Because of the transparency of open source, researchers work and focus on security, improving security, finding security bugs. Many companies work together on the same piece of open source to secure that. And this, when I mention many companies and many groups, that another aspect there isn't just security, which is strong, but it's the avoidance of lock-in, because you are not bound to one vendor. You're not bound to one group of people working on it. You have the software. If you want, given the freedoms I mentioned earlier, you can just take that software and maintain it yourself and proceed if that becomes necessary.
Thank you. Here in FPA, we act as a platform for public administrations who want to innovate. So why should the public sector choose open source?
If I look at public sector, one thing that comes to my mind, apart from the services I consume as a citizen, is there's a lot of data in the public sector. It's data of us as citizens. It's data related more to the operations of the administrations, and it's data related to some of the services provided like maps and statistics. And some of that data wants to become open, or we want it to become open. Think of maps, think of statistics and some of the data. But some of that data, or a lot of the data, is very personal data. It's healthcare data, it's text data, it's even just your address and other things. And so we need to carefully protect the data. The public services need to be very careful in protecting the data. And data sovereignty is key. And my point is, how can we have data sovereignty if we don't have platform sovereignty? If we don't ultimately control the platforms and the systems that hold the data, that protect and secure the data, how can we really be sure of having ownership and control of the data? So that's one aspect. The second aspect is, you mentioned that, is innovation. Open source is an innovation driver. Cell phones, there is no cell phone I can think of that doesn't have open source. Android is largely open source, but there's a lot of open source in iOS, for example. ERP systems, modern ERP systems go to in-memory databases. That's a huge innovation step, and it's running on open source if you look at the bigger vendors. SpaceX uses open source on their rockets and so on. So open source really is the engine, even if we don't see it necessary, but it's the engine of innovation. And the third is agility. The way, partly because of the advanced and innovative technologies, part of the ways of working together, collaborating, we gain agility. And in business, we talk about time to market. In public sector, I would call it the time to citizens. So how can we serve citizens better and faster and bring innovation and better services there?
Thank you, Gerald. Just one last question. Considering the relevance of the work of the public sector that also you mentioned, how can we foster the creation and dissemination of an open source culture?
Yeah, don't. So the first is a don't, the others are positives. Don't try to go alone. Because there is many of us who have experience with open source, other governments, local municipalities in other countries maybe, or in other parts of Italy, just reach out, learn where there are successes, engage maybe with vendors who have expertise in the sector, engage with communities. And one very strong success factor I've seen there is actually for users to attend a conference or attend conferences and share their experiences and reach developers and others and inspire them to actually improve software, improve open source in certain directions. So don't necessarily go alone. The second is actually give it a chance. If there are public tenders, make sure open source has a chance, because it's not written in a way that a certain product is already specified, or it's codified in a way that there is only one commercial solution that actually meets the requirements that are put there. And last but not least, just start small, but give it a try. And then, if I started planting a garden this year, and the point wasn't that everything needs to be perfect from the beginning, but start by planting a little plant, and in this case, have a team, have one small project, and learn from that project, and share what you learn. And maybe then there's other projects that can become bigger and benefit from that experience, and use that, to innovate and share and learn. And then, like, open source has taken off. Like 25 years, open source hasn't existed as a concept, maybe, but not as a name. The name is roughly that old, and see where it has moved. And so start and then engage and grow. And I think you'll reap the benefits of more independence, of sovereignty, of security, and agility.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Gerald Pfeifer, Chief Technology Officer at SUSE, for being with us and for your interesting considerations.
Thanks. It's been a pleasure being here.